Hey guys, so this video today is the first part of a 2-video series, just taking a look at what it's like to work with the Zcam camera systems. And this really is meant for anyone who's either interested or planning on using these cameras in the future, just to give you a quick hands-on look at what it's like to use them, including things like button layout, how to use the menus, connecting your phone with Wi-Fi, Z-Log codecs, all that kind of stuff. And I just wrapped my first production day using the F6, and I gotta say that I was really impressed just with the functionality of this system and how easy it was to use and how everything was laid out. So let's jump into things. In this first video, we're gonna focus on the button layout, running through the menus, connecting your phone, and operational things like that. Just a really brief video to give you a visual of how these cameras operate and a little bit of guidance if you're jumping into it for the first time. Okay, let's start by talking about the body and the button layout on these cameras. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to power the camera up. So on the E2, you have your power button on the right-hand side, and you also have these custom function buttons. So there's 3 of them on the E2. And the flagship models do have the same power button and function buttons, but they're on the left-hand side of the camera, and you do get 1 extra custom function button, so you have a total of 4 instead of 3 on the E2. But to power it up, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to hold down the power button. Okay, so the top menu of the camera is the same on the E2 as it is on the flagship model, so you basically have your menu button, you have your ISO, shutter, EV, and then an OK or an enter button. And the shutter and the EV buttons also double as up and down buttons for when you're using the menu system. And then the ISO button is actually a function button as well, so you can change that if you want. Personally, for me, I like having it set to ISO. I found when I did my shoot with the F6, it was really nice to be able to just change that on the fly as I was shooting very easily. So when it comes to the menu system, let's dive into that. I'm running a 5-inch small HD monitor on top here, but you do have your menus that come up on this small panel here. So you can also hook your phone up if you don't have a monitor. I am going to show you how to do that later on, but for now, let's dive into the menu settings on the top screen here. And one thing I will mention really quick, so by default, the top screen is going to display some of your information, your record time left, audio meters, ISO, stuff like that. But if you push the function button and the OK button at the same time, see if I can get it to work, there we go, it will actually bring up a little preview of your screen. So kind of interesting if you ever want to check, double check. So we'll go back. There we go. Okay, so let's dive into these menu settings. So we'll hit menu. So you basically have, like any other menu system, everything under specific categories. What I like about Zcam is that it seems to be organized really well. There aren't kind of hundreds of settings under each category. It isn't too overwhelming. It's pretty straightforward. So the first one we have here is record. So under record, the main thing you're going to do in here is you're going to pick your recording resolution. So right now, we're on the E2, we're set to Cinema 4K 241, but if you go into that menu, you can just scroll up and down to pick Cinema 4K, 4K 241, all of these different modes. So we'll leave it set to Cinema 4K 241, and then you can also pick your project frame rate. So we're set to 24 frames, and those are the main things you're gonna do in there. So we'll go out and we'll go to video. This is the next kind of most important one. Under the video menu, you're gonna pick, first off, the codec that you wanna use. So we're set to H.265 right now. And the Zcam E2 and the flagship models, they can all shoot in H.264, H.265, and then ProRes, and then Z-RAW. The thing is though, is depending on which codec you use, that's gonna determine what the fastest frame rate you can shoot is. So for example, say we want to shoot ProRes 422. We're going to select that. We'll go back out to the video menu page. And the other thing that's important in here is this is where you can select your variable frame rate control. Right now it's off. If we go to the bottom of the list, we'll see that 60 frames per second is the max that we can shoot if we're shooting in ProRes 422. But let's say we go and select H.265, go back out, go to variable frame rate. Now if we go to the bottom of the list, we can shoot at 150 frames per second in H.265 in 4K 241. So really the codec you're using and the resolution you're using is going to determine the frame rate that you can use. And at first this was a little bit of a turnoff for me when I first used the F6, but very quickly I got used to kind of understanding what the frame rates were in the codec that I wanted to use. So I did a lot of shooting at ProRes 422 and I could max out at 60, and for the work that I was doing, that was more than enough. So that's really the main thing that you're going to do in here. So under the record menu, you would pick your resolution. Under the video menu, you pick your codec, and then you can select your variable frame rate. And like I mentioned, for me, I had the F6 set up so I could select variable frame rate using one of the custom function buttons. That way I had easy access to it. Okay, so the audio menu, here you're going to pick your input. So there is a mini XLR, and then there also is your standard 3.5 millimeter input. And then your input gain, you can obviously select between auto and manual, and then you can adjust your levels here if you're set to manual. So under exposure, this is going to give you a couple options here. One of the most important ones for me is the shutter angle. Obviously that's out set to the shutter button on the top here, but you can also select, let's find it here. So your shutter operation. So right now I have it set to angle. By default, it was set to shutter speed, and I went ahead and changed it so it displays shutter angle instead, which is what I prefer, but obviously you can set that to whatever you like. And then obviously as well in here, you can select your ISO. Again, it is set to that function button on the top by default, which is really nice. White balance under here, you have manual control, so you can select Kelvin and tint, and then obviously you have all your kind of standard modes as well as auto. I left it set to manual and 5600 when I shot. Focus, that's a menu I haven't dove into too much because I didn't use autofocus, nor would I plan to use autofocus with this camera. But if you want to dive into those settings, that's where it is. Image, so this is where you're going to select your profile. I shot in Z-Log 2. You can select to shoot in Rec 709 or a flat, which I'm assuming is just a lower contrast Rec 709 or Hyperlog Gamma, but I would personally recommend shooting in Z-Log 2. That's going to give you the most dynamic range and then also the most flexibility in post for grading. And then sharpness is set to weak. That is what I left it to on the F6 as well. I don't really want the camera applying any sharpness. I want to do that in post. Connect, we're going to dive into that in a second. That's for Wi-Fi and also HDMI. We'll go to system first. So under system, this is where you can access a lot of your assist tools for your display. So for instance, you can pull up scopes, peaking for focus, then you have all these exposure tools. So right now it's set to zebra. It's actually off, but if we go in here, we can select false color, zebra, and monochrome. So that's really nice for exposure, and then you can adjust the parameters for those settings however you prefer. So that's really nice. A lot of options to customize this camera to kind of suit your shooting style in the best way possible. And then also, let's go back to the top here, or we'll go to assist tools. So load LUT, so this is a monitoring LUT. So I have ZRGB AX2. That was the recommended profile I read online. Basically, this is just a LUT to Rec 709 for monitoring. So that worked really nice. But there are a bunch of different options in here that you can choose. You can have it off. Also, again, like I mentioned, I had it set to a function button on the side, so I could toggle it on and off, even though most of the time it was on. So we'll jump out of there. There is a D-squeeze if you're shooting anamorphic, which is nice as well. And then you can jump in here to these user buttons, and this is where you set up your function buttons. So you can pick all sorts of different options here to really customize the camera to suit you the best way possible. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to jump into this connect menu. So this is for Wi-Fi, but it's also for your HDMI. So if we go to HDMI first, you can turn your info display off and on. So you can have, if you're running a 5-inch monitor like I am, you can choose to have it display the camera information or just display the image. And then there's a couple different options for how you want the layout to appear. And then also your output here, signal output out of HDMI. So that's where you'd access that stuff. And then we are going to jump into Wi-Fi. I'll show you how to set that up here. So we want to go to network, and this is for connecting your phone. Okay, so for wireless setup, what you want to do is you want to go into your phone's Wi-Fi, and you want to find the network that's called Zcam. You connect to it. The default password is 123456778. And then you also want to make sure you have this mode here on the camera set to direct. It's usually set to router by default. So you want to change it to direct. Once your phone's connected, you'll be able to open the Zcam app, hit control, and then it will bring up, we'll put it right here for a second. So it'll bring up your image, and then you also have all of these tools here. So it's actually really neat. You can record via your phone. You can pull up all your different monitoring LUTs. You can pull up all your different tools here. You can pick your project frame rates. You can bring up, let's see what else, histograms, waveforms, parades. So really cool, a lot of usability. I actually didn't use this app for my shoot because I was running a 7-inch monitor, and I actually hadn't played around with it too much, but when I did hook it up before this review, I gotta say, I really like the fact that you can record and then you can also change all your settings. So the one other important thing that I just want to mention really quick as well is that the firmware on all of the Zcam cameras is the same. It's 0.94 at the moment, and all of the menus are going to appear the same. Obviously, there'll be a few different settings depending on the capability of the camera that you're using, but essentially if you get used to the menu system on one camera, that's going to translate to any of the Zcam models that you use, which is really nice. Okay, so I hope that quick overview gives you a little bit of a better understanding of the look and the feel of these cameras when you're working with them and the menu systems and things like that. Like I said, I used the F6 only for one shoot day, but I did find it pretty quick to learn and also very nice to use. I wasn't digging around for things and everything was pretty intuitive. In the next video, we're gonna dive a little deeper and we're gonna take a look at some footage. We're gonna pull it into Premiere. I'm gonna talk about recording formats, and then I'm also gonna show you how you can grade Z-Log footage quite easily using Zcam's plugin tool for Premiere.